Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening, this lovely sunny evening. My name's Helen Seslowski. I'm the events director for Oblong Books in the Hudson Valley. We have two stores, one in Rhinebeck and one in Millerton. If you're not from our area, leave a note in the chat and let us know where you're from. If you have any questions during the program, please type them in the chat or in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and we'll address them at the end of the conversation portion of this evening's program. We're very pleased this evening to welcome Megan Mayhew Bergman, who's joining us to talk about her new story collection, How Strange a Season, an evocative and engrossing collection of stories and a novella about women experiencing life's challenges and beauty. In this collection of haunting stories, Bergman portrays women who wrestle with problematic inheritances, a modern glass house on a treacherous California cliff, a water-starved ranch, and an abandoned plantation on a river near Charleston. Bergman's provocative prose asks the questions, what are we leaving behind for our descendants to hold, and what price do they pay for our mistakes? How Strange a Season is published by Simon & Schuster and is available in both our stores and online through oblongbooks.com, and I'll post links for those in the chat shortly. Megan is the author of Almost Famous Women and Birds of a Lesser Paradise. Her short fiction has appeared in 2 volumes of the Best American Short Stories and on NPR's Selected Shorts. She has written columns on climate change and the natural world for The Guardian and the Paris Review, and her work has been featured in the New York Times, The New Yorker, and more. Conducting the conversation with Megan this evening and joining us from LA, I believe, Ivy, is author Ivy Pochoda, the author of These Women, The Art of Disappearing, Visitation Street, and Wonder Valley, a Los Angeles Times Book Prize finalist and winner of the Strand Critics Award. Welcome to you both. It's a pleasure to have you with us this evening. And Ivy, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Well, thank you, Helen. And hi, Megan. It's such a pleasure to be here in Zoom format, although I think I'm going to see you next week, so that makes it slightly less alien. I absolutely loved this collection of short stories. I had no idea what to expect. I've been in a weird place and I didn't read any press or anything, and it was just such a delight, story after story. And I was wondering if you wanted to read first, or if you wanted to talk first, or how you wanted to proceed.
Sure, maybe I can break the ice and read first,
okay, cool.
if that's easy. But first, thanks for doing this for me, and I'm glad we're getting this little interpersonal warm up before real in-person time in LA.
Immersion into the real world.
Yeah, just training wheels, social training wheels, which I need even on a good day pre-pandemic. And thank you to anyone who's tuned in or anyone who watches this after the fact. No short story writer takes an audience for granted ever. So I thought I might start actually by reading the quotes that I put in the front of the book. It's one of, Ivy, I don't know about you, but it's one of my favorite parts of assembling the whole package, is just thinking about these little spells you cast at the beginning. Is that something you like too?
Yeah, it's funny. I have a book coming out in a year, and my first book I didn't do a quote. My second book I did a quote. My third book I really went and looked for the quote, and now I don't have a title right now, and I'm just searching for those quotes, and I have one for sure, and then I'm messing around with the other one, and I feel like I don't want to decide because I like the process of deciding, adding them in.
Totally. I feel the same way. When I had about 4 that I was depending on what version of the book was in, where I would take one, move one out, sit with it. So yeah, I get that process.
I just read a book that's coming out in a year that has and it went, I think you should choose the right number, but this author decided to do 20, and it's so cool because it kind of goes it sort of talks about the whole process of why we do this, and it was really a nifty thing, and I read it with much glee.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would read a lot of upfront quotes. I even let my students do upfront quotes when they're putting together their final portfolios. I think that in titles, it's such that those last little touches that you can give readers to sort of mine a work with or hold a little more closely. So I do love that part. Although titling, just to use a little fancy word here, titling's a bitch sometimes.
Totally.
Yeah.
Are you feeling good? Never find it. Yeah, I hate it. I hate it so much right now.
So the quotes that I did start with, one is from Dickinson, and I know that, you know, if I evoke Dickinson, I have to be thoughtful about it because, you know, you don't want a Dickinson scholar to, you know, come after you. So I checked with Dan Chasen just to say, did I get this right? And he helped me get all the italics and the, you know, the em dashes just as they should be. But, you know, the quote from Dickinson is, "A wounded deer leaps highest." And then from Sylvia Plath, her unabridged journals, there's a quote and it says, "I don't believe that the meek will inherit the earth. They decompose in the bloody soil of war, of business, of art, and they rot into the warm ground under the spring rains." So, you know, cheerful stuff, cheerful stuff. So I thought I would just read from the first story, Workhorse. It's one of my favorites in the book, and I wrote it when I was on book tour in Italy. It was just sort of like stewing. I was on the plane, and I always work really well on airplanes because I feel like no one can really reach me and I'm finally in a vacuum, and I can't check my phone as much.
Yeah, that's getting harder and harder.
Yeah, I know. As I was saying that, I was like, I definitely bought internet on the plane last
Me
week.
too. I don't care how much it costs.
I know. You can read me on that one pretty well, I think. Okay, well, I'll read a few pages of Workhorse and then we can chat. Okay, so Workhorse. Upon retirement from his banking job, my father took his wealth and custom shirts and rented the top floor of an ancient salmon-colored apartment building on the Piazza San Domenico in Cagliari. His younger brother Paolo ran a cafe on the bottom floor, a business that spilled out from the sidewalk and onto the piazza. "People talk like they mean it there," he said when he explained his decision to me. "I need things that feel real. I need anchors." I thought it was natural that Dad should return to Sardinia, the island that made him. He always said he missed the olive groves, strong sun, and loud conversation. I sensed he was waiting for me to talk him out of it, to beg him to stay in New York. And the truth was, I wanted him gone. I was in the process of getting to know myself, but you had to fight smart with my father. "You'll love it," I said, drawing tiny stars on the corner of an envelope. I often found things to do while talking with him on the phone, small acts of self-protection, weeding the neighbor's garden, flossing my teeth, browsing my grandmother's 6 recipes for gnocchi. The less you listened, the less you got hurt. "So you can't wait for me to leave," he said. I knew it. "No, Papa, I'm happy for you," I said, somewhat absently, going back home. "How's business?" he asked. "Steady," I said, meaning steadily non-existent. I'd taken the little bit of money my mother left me and invested it in a boutique floral business. I made large-scale plant installations for fashion shows, commercial shoots, corporate launches, high net worth engagements. A coverlet of 200 red roses for the tech entrepreneur caught in an extramarital affair. Pale pink grass for an alt-folk album cover. Business was episodic, even a surprise. "It's time you did something extraordinary," he said. "Each installation is extraordinary," I said, offended. I thought of the carpet of Bermuda grass and birds of paradise I'd installed in a corporate bank lobby a few months before. The bank was advertising a wellness initiative. The brochure model wore 3-inch heels and held out an apple toward the camera, and she struck me as some sort of supermarket Eve. I had to leave when I saw her standing in the middle of my installation. She cheapened the art. After that disappointment, I conceptualized a big signature project, something unusual and iconic. I purchased an enormous 12-foot-high terrarium from Austria and had spent the last 2 weeks cursing as I attempted to assemble it in my shop. "Let me review your balance sheet," Papa said. "Send me a copy." "No." "No? Don't be ridiculous. I'm an expert, and I'm free." My father loved Jack Welch, barking into the telephone and making deals. He told you what you would do with your life. He told my mother, me, his brother, the woman who cleaned his house. And to reassure myself of my independence, my own strength, I spent the last 3 years steadily defying him. No, I would not take his clothes to the cleaner after Mama died. No, I wouldn't listen to his thoughts about Berlusconi again. I wouldn't grow out my hair to soften my face, and I would not give him my outdated balance sheet or visit Italy. Not now, anyway. My world doesn't revolve around profit, I insisted. Maybe it should. Maybe then you'd feel satisfied, he said. It was important to my father to win, but I'd come to see that he did not respect people who agreed with him. His love language was war. I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm so interested in the fact that you say, not that any, you always have to have your favorite children and characters in a book or stories in a collection, I'm sure. And I was very interested to hear you say that was one of your favorites. For me, that's the story that was the most sort of immediately recognizable. I mean, I grew up in New York, and I've moved to Europe, and my parents are very involved in my life. And that was the one where it started off the collection, and I just thought, well, this is going to be I was a little taken aback that the first story was something that I kind of connected with in an odd way, where all the other stories were very much in worlds that seemed very foreign, or at least less accessible. So I was sort of interested in your love for this one, although of course I'm sure you love them all.
Yeah, I do love them all, depending on the day. And there are things, I mean, I wonder if you've had this experience when reading your work after it's published. I'd edit it now, if I could.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
There's tinkering I would do. But I think what interests me about it is the protagonist's desire to be audacious and do something big, like the men in her life have done. This sort of resisting the current of them setting the tone with their work lives and their needs, and the desire to kind of push against that a little or a lot.
Yeah, it's what she does is very interesting, and it's big, but also I was her building this terrarium. It's a big gesture, but it's only personal to her, and it's not like something that really would affect too many people. Like it's a really it's a huge gesture, but with not a lot of resonance to the outside world.
Yeah, it's almost self-indulgent in a way.
Yeah.
Like the indulgence, I think, is the thing that fascinates me. This, like, when do we serve ourselves versus serve others question that I would say a lot of women I know wrestle with, but I think probably a lot of humans in general wrestle with it.
Yeah. I mean, you could say women. I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to be too sweeping about it, but yeah.
No, I know. Well, it is a book that's predominantly, if not entirely, about women. There's a few glimpses from the male perspective later on, but so I think in the context of this book, saying women is apt. I write novels, for anyone who's not unfamiliar with that, and people always ask me, how long does it take to write a novel, or how in the world do you come up with this stuff? And I said, well, it's only just one story, and it's it's not so, once you have it, there's problems, but but for me, like, the idea of coming up or writing a collection of short stories is so absolutely mind-blowingly difficult that I'm just sort of beyond impressed when I read something where there's like 7 or 8 stories. How does it work? Do you I just really literally want to know, like you said you were writing this one while you're on a book tour, like do you write them sequentially or start to finish? Or are you working sort of?
I'm just an absolute agent of chaos at all times. Okay. But I first want to say I admire the fact that you have written 4 novels. For me, like swimming to the other end of the pool with a long story, just the novella is as long as I've gotten. I mean, I'm incrementally moving, but so I honor what you're doing over there. I think for me, I usually just have these bursts, these flashes of inspiration where I know there's some emotional core, and it usually, there's a character I'm interested in and a landscape. And I tend to be sort of obsessed with landscape, and that almost in a way where I've had to incorporate into my self-editing practice a way to make sure that I'm not letting the landscape outshine the story or the characters. I
have the same problem.
Setting. Yeah, setting. Yeah. Love it. Yeah.
So, okay. But the flat, I guess it's funny. I guess it's just a way of like retraining your brain, like when I first started writing novels, I wasn't particularly good at it. Like I had to work at it, and I didn't know how to think about the various components. And now when I think about it, I can just sort of, I live in LA, and I know people who do a lot of screenwriting, and they just can think sort of about the whole structure. And it's like second nature, just like if you play basketball, you can envision the net. So I guess maybe just thinking about the shape and I like to think about the shape and sizes of things. And I think maybe you can just retrain your brain to do that. I think on this large, messy scale, and then I have to think I don't have to finish it anytime soon,
That's what you're saying is really resonating with me, because I think my brain, I don't want to say just be a short story writer, but it is the form I think that suits the narrative impulse in my brain. I think it might have been sitting through too many church sermons as a young woman in the South, but there's something about the sort of bite-sized, compressed arc that stories seem to sort of organically settle into when I'm thinking about them.
I was surprised because, as I said, I didn't read too much about your book before diving into it, and then I noticed that one of the stories was quite long as I was looking at the table of contents, because I said I want to read one a day and really think about it, and then there's this one that was quite long, and I was like, I said, though, it doesn't say it's a novella anywhere on the book. It's very long novella, even. It's like pushing into novel territory. I would think,
I almost feel affirmed by you saying that. Like sometimes I'm like, did I write a novel or didn't I?
Yeah, like 5 more pages and it's a novel. But it also isn't a novel. I just was so fascinated about it. I want to reread it because it's Indigo Run, for those of you who haven't read the book, is the novella that we're talking about, and it comes quite towards the end. And it's kind of an epic, about a multi-generational epic. And Megan's, your compression of information is so interesting. The way you can kind of, oh, sorry, my chihuahua is barking. And that's,
it's
going to be a whole thing now. But how did you know? I guess I really want to know like a bunch of stuff about this, but did you know it was a novella, or did it just start like expanding?
It was, I didn't know it was a novella. I worked on it forever. It's the oldest thing in the book. And I think you're right, the most ambitious thing in terms of managing a long arc, and it is multi-generational. And I knew that I wanted to talk about the toxicity of holding on to Southern tradition, the parts of Southern tradition that are indeed toxic.
Mm-hmm.
And what that meant as a sort of like inherited sickness, that love of tradition, of place. There's still $1 billion tourism industry centered around plantation culture, which I think is still odd that exists and persists.
I'm married to a Southerner, so I know.
Oh, and I keep wondering, I'm like, when are we gonna, call it? when is it good? When are we tired of the hoop skirts and the kind of Gone with the Wind fanfare? And so, the novella is just my way of writing into that curiosity and pain and my own inherited issues, that all, the generational, mess.
It's interesting that you say sickness, because it actually makes the characters sick, like physically. In the book, I mean, obviously there's both the proverbial reason that they're sick and the literal and the figurative, I guess. But they're all sick, and it's an infection. I would say never is the answer to your question about like, when is this? I think it's getting worse, because I see more and more of my friends who go to Atlanta or stuff for a film shoot, and they come back with like tchotchkes, and it's just super offensive, but they have no connection to that sort of tradition of, was it Sand Mountain or whatever. It's like, it's not funny, and I feel like people are fetishizing the South. White people are fetishizing the South as like back to the land type stuff, and it's forgetting the tradition of,
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated. I mean, there are amazing activists and PhDs
Sure.
and people really pushing against the current down there that I think get missed in the contemporary narrative. And I think what, I get frustrated with, which it sounds like you get frustrated with too, is just the Vaseline lens on the Old South, in movies. And I also feel like in literary culture, I've had conversations with other Southern writers, which is like, we don't want to write a story about biscuits and Meemaw, and whatever else was happening. It's I don't know, owning the ugliness, but also expanding a notion of the tax that has on everyone. It is a sickness.
Yeah, and what is the time period of Indigo Run is really interesting, because it doesn't catch up to the present. It ends in 54. No, am I wrong about this?
Yeah, no, you're right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I was sort of taken by that, because I kept expecting that it was going to sort of, take us into the modern moment. Were you ever tempted to bring these characters into, this century?
I was. It's defined by hurricanes.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
There's like the historical constraints of, I'm really, theoretically hoping that Hurricane Hazel is the one that wipes this persistent particular Southern plantation off the map, and that happens in 54. And the one that happens in the 1700s was unnamed because they weren't naming storms at that point. Yeah, but that's the constraint.
Right. Okay. So, I was sort of surprised. You've developed a very well-deserved reputation as a climate journalist and also an author of climate fiction, which is not a phrase I'm going to use again, but I don't really know what the proper is. Though I think you're on the climate panel at the LA Times Festival of Books. So
exactly.
yeah. And I had expected that these stories were going to be a little more, and I hate this phrase, heavy-handed about climate change and environmental issues. And I was not pleasantly surprised, but I was really taken by how it's handled with a light touch. It's very powerful, like the hurricanes in Indigo Run, or the storm in Inheritance. Is that the worst? Yeah. I'm trying my best with all the titles.
The titles are tough. I'm not even sure I have them straight. So
yeah, okay, good. I don't know how many characters are in my books. I'm like, I think there's 6 sections. It could be 2. But the climate, the climate disaster sort of overhangs the book, informs it, but is never sort of the center of the stories. Now, I hate this question, but like, how intentional was, there are lots of themes that connect all the stories, but how intentional was that awareness as you wrote story to story?
Love that you noticed that. It was a big intention of mine, not to let, I think you're right that readers have saturation points, and we can feel when somebody's coming into a story with a strong, righteous intent. I said last night when Sven and I were talking, David Gates, in Bennington used to talk about how he regretted including a long passage about how to open an AOL email. Yeah. And I think, there are things like
send an email.
Yeah, I know. And I think there are things, like technology that are so fully integrated into existence and the way we think and feel and operate. And I think climate change is that. Like, for me, when somebody writes, I won't say all like this, but I didn't want to use it as a device or like a cheap plot point. I wanted it to be in the background, pressurizing everything and already a given and already a construct. So the fact that you recognize that makes me really happy, because that was very much an intention.
Yeah, I mean, another thing I learned at Bennington was like, never write to theme, from Brett Anthony Johnson. So like, that it's just a death knell for a story, or a collection, actually, I think it would probably be worse than a collection of short stories if they were thematically linked in a really obvious way. But I thought the way you integrated various environmental disasters without it being about environmental disaster was just kind of the way we live too, because while some people are very much aware and active in climate issues, for the most part, it's just sort of hovering in the distance and sometimes touches down and affects us. And it always should affect us, but doesn't for the most part. So yeah, it's more realistic. I think about that thing about opening email all the time when I write, and I'm like,
it leaves a mark.
I know. So every once in a while, someone will ask me why. They'll notice, like, why are there no cell phones in your books? I'm like, because maybe in the future that's going to be weird.
I mean, we all learned something from David in that moment. And if we included it, it would be like chapter 2, everyone was on their phones. Chapter 3, yeah. So, but I wrestle with that. I think we'll do the same thing with climate change in different ways. But something you were speaking about earlier, just the way there's the term compound disaster, and I think that's the era that we live in now. Whether it's like our personal challenges with the pandemic or health, anything that, or systemic inequity that's already happening, and you put climate on top of it all, and it just compounds and worsens. So this, that pressurized feeling. Yeah.
Yeah, and I could see like a book about, interlinked stories about climate disaster could just be very preachy and very like, you're sort of telling people what to think, as opposed to sort of leading them into the awareness of, it's just another texture in the stories.
How to make it new, how to make it fresh. I mean, I think I teach a lot of environmental writers at Middlebury, and I tell them this all the time. I'm like, you have to get specific and you have to make it fresh. It's sort of like, I have a rule about no swirling autumn leaves. I won't ever let students turn in a story that begins with swirling autumn leaves. And how to make something new.
Yeah, I'm sort of up to getting there with like various California apocalypses. Like it just you gotta someone's gotta change bring something new to that. Otherwise I don't think I can read it. Everyone has such a I'm sorry, this is a completely off topic thing that I probably everyone sort of has a very it's a very traditional view of the apocalypse. And I feel like I haven't yet seen, a new version of the apocalypse in fiction. Anyway,
Yeah.
that is my note.
Let's let that be an outcome of our call. Ivy and Megan want a fresh apocalypse.
I want a fresh apocalypse. But aside from the climate in the background, obviously the thing that really resonates in these stories is the women at the center of each of them, who I'm going through a lot in my life right now. As anyone notices, my bookshelves are empty. I'm moving. My house is breaking up a little bit, and I was very taken with how lonely and alone the women in these stories were. And I had to imagine that, you had been thinking about it. I have to ask, do you think that this loneliness is a prerequisite to happiness and or strength for the women in the book?
Whew, that is, what a big question and what an important question. I mean, I think it might, yeah. We can talk more next week too, but I think I really believe in post-traumatic enlightenment. Every time I feel like our culture mocks crises, but I think all the people that I hold most dear or whose opinions I value most or who I feel authentically close to have gone through some sort of like break and reforge process, times 4 or 5 at this point. But I believe in the power and health of a crisis, and I want to be a psychologically astute writer. And a lot of the women I know are, I think it was something about the political and social era we just lived through, and this sense of like, okay, things have not been equal. The pandemic worsened a lot of those, feelings of aloneness or isolation or equity, whatever was already there. The knife got twisted for a lot of people, a quarter turn, a half turn. But it's, from conversations with women, from things I've gone through, I wanted that awareness and that sort of hunger and that appetite. Like a lot of the women I know and respect have huge appetites that are never fully honored or that, don't always get voiced. And I, felt that.
That's an amazing answer. I was not expecting it to be so clear. And you are an incredibly psychologically astute writer. I felt like the idea of like hunger and wanting I hadn't really assigned that need to, my reading. But there's that idea that even if in the moment these characters are satisfied, there's going to be this eternal questing for, oh God, that's a horrible word. My daughter's watching Lord of the Rings, whatever. So,
right,
this eternal, search for not the next thing, but like the satisfaction isn't entirely there. And I think that's systemic in like the way women have been treated by society. And I think for me, at least, the pandemic was a very odd, I think for everybody, for lots of people, lots of women, a very odd regression into traditional gender norms that I think don't sit well. And these women in this book were so relieving to spend time with, because although they're not all particularly happy, they're all aware that something needs to change.
Yeah, I mean that sort of restlessness and that questing. I mean, I've been through enough therapy now to know that I may not totally ever lose that in myself. But yeah, I mean the arc of that, I think the thing I fear most for characters or for myself is stagnation, or like over acceptance or settling, that sort of feeling. But yeah, I mean, I think you nailed that sensation.
Yeah, it was fascinating. And I also, it was fascinating. And then I was then when we got to Indigo Run, where you really threw me for a loop, because there's this very powerful, the character who leads the story, Helena, I'm not sure how you want to say it. I thought, okay, now we're going to have the woman who's going to do it all. And she's going to, she's the, the girl, the young woman in the falling apart plantation who fires guns, and then it all just goes wrong for her. And I thought that we were going to finally get the character, not that you needed it, who was going to, buck the trend and, make a stand up for herself and be the exception to the rule, but quite the opposite. You really took her for an interesting ride. Did you have some sense that when you met this woman, did you think that she was going to have a tough life, or was it like, did you know where she was going?
I think I knew where she was going, although I wanted her to be indomitable in some ways. And I think, she tries to numb that feeling, that sensation as she ages, because there's just not space for it, not a place for it. I know you're a parent and I'm a parent as well, and I have 2 daughters, and I had read this, it's sort of an out of date parenting book, but it's called Reviving Ophelia. I don't know if you know it. It was written in the 90s. It's almost sort of quaint because it happens before social media at all. But in the book, it talks about how young women sort of fold in on themselves around adolescence. Like they grow up thinking, I can be anything, I can do anything, I'm strong. And then the cultural wave that they're met with, has a lot of information and data and attitudes that counteract that. And, Ivy, that's our generation, kind of going through that. So I was thinking about that, that raw material, that strength, that potential, and what it's met with.
It's interesting. I used to work, volunteer in an organization that teaches the sport of squash to inner city kids to help them technically get into college, but actually just more to have more structure and more self-confidence. And the most dangerous time period for the program is for their young women between the ages of 12 and 15, because they're that age, they're so susceptible to, if they retain all the girls, but like the you can see the outside influences, and women, as opposed, they start off in the program and they're really strong, they're playing squash and they're doing well, but suddenly they start not looking at themselves as individual units, but seeing themselves reflected through the way other people think about them. And that's when it becomes so important to be part of an organization like that, or play sports, or be in theater or something where it's not just you seeing yourself through like the collective gaze of your peer group or boys or whatever, but actually having like an activity. So
yeah, anyway. I mean, that whole sensation I was thinking about so much as I wrote this. And I was actually thinking about you, Ivy, today, when I was in Cambridge reading, and I passed a very large squash complex, and it just felt like a sign from the universe preparing me for my talk with you.
You could see a terrible picture of me in a pleated skirt in there if you walked into that building. A building that didn't exist when I was in college.
Okay.
Put that out there. But speaking of sports, I love that. Are you a good swimmer? Because it keeps coming up in this.
I wouldn't say I'm a great swimmer. I was on the swim team. I do love. Okay. I've done like sprint triathlons. I've done some. Yeah, I just love sports. I'm a big sports dork.
I always write about sports I can't do when I write books. I feel like it's much easier for me to access something I'm not good at, because I get too like clench-fisted about things that I'm a terrible swimmer.
Open water swimming actually terrifies me, and so I might have been doing that. Like when I did the triathlon, I had to really like, I had like a psychological breakdown kind of whenever I can see like unfathomable depths, that place where you can't see the bottom anymore. I just freak out when you're far from the shore. I don't mind how deep it is.
Yeah. I was watching an open water swimming like competition in a loch in Scotland when I was in Europe last time. It was like this whole, it was like their Olympics, but it was open water, and it was all the events were on lakes, and it was very scary. And that takes a lot of, I don't know, it's cold. So did you think of, I know that you're towing towards a novel, but I just keep wanting to talk about the novella because I'm really interested in novellas as an art form. I think they are kind of one of the most undervalued form of storytelling right now. I think novels are getting shorter, and I think novellas and novels are going to merge in this like 180 page perfection genre. Did you think of expanding the story more? Because I could see where you could, but I'm also glad that you didn't.
Yeah, I actually share your passion for novellas. I teach a class at Middlebury. It's a lot of grading, it's a heavy grading class, but I love the student work that comes from focusing on one story in a really devoted way. And I teach Dennis Johnson, Zadie Smith's Embassy of Cambodia. I'm like you, I love this compressed form and the tidiness of it, and getting rid of the bloat and what it can do artistically. And I love your prediction that we will, that the novel and the novella are going to come, meet somewhere and have an agreement. I agree with you. I don't think we have the attention span.
I think it's actually happening just from dumb publishing things I hear all the time. My new book is very short. I think it's really short. But then I said, my book's like only 68,000 words, 65,000 words. And that's what's I hate that. That's what's in right now. But then I've heard like someone told me my book's 55,000 words. I'm like, that's getting really low. Like it's getting down to like 150 pages. Which Dennis Johnson novella do you teach?
Train Dreams.
Oh, I love Train Dreams.
I love it. And the student, it's heavy. You can't, all of his work is, and it's, sometimes it feels like a risk to teach controversial, intense work like his in 2022. But my students always handle it really well. And he also has that, like, there's the grit, there's the amazing tight writing, and then there's the whiff of the supernatural in that one that I love. Yeah.
I read that at the same time I read Sherry Holman's book, Witches on the Road Tonight. And I have them sort of, which is also Whiff of the Supernatural, is about a WPA guy who's either surveying the highway down in Appalachia, and he's sort of winds up with a woman who's a witch. And it's very similar to Train Dreams, but
I haven't read that, but it sounds like something I would
somehow like I get them very conflated in my head, although I've read Train Dreams many times. I love how in Indigo Run, though, there's you have this character, a woman who's left Norway. We don't know very much about her, and the temptation of the novel would be to tell us a lot about her. And were you tempted to give us more there?
I do think there were scenes that I have cut out. I was interested in intelligent women who needed to find some way to fend for themselves or to find power or agency, the connection of that with labor and finances. But you're right. But I also needed her to, I think, have a whiff of mystery, and the unknown there, and to be sort of an agent of destabilization, but not a villain, all the same.
I want to make sure we get to talk about Peaches, which is which we talked about right before this chat started, which is a story that I loved, especially because I kept expecting it was going to be like a crime story or a murder story. And you had mentioned that you had some crime inspiration for this one, or is that true?
I love mysteries. Like I was telling you earlier, my daughters and I watched all 12 seasons of Murder, She Wrote during the Trump administration as our, coping mechanism. And it's honestly, my first love of reading comes from vintage Nancy Drew yellow hardbacks. Like I live for it. And I wish I could. I think I'm always trying to get that feeling back that I used to have reading those at the beach. But Peaches 1979, I was trying to write toward a landscape that I lived in. I was born December 23rd, 1979, so I have like 8 days in the 70s. In rural South Carolina, where I only lived for a few months. And I thought, okay, I don't understand this landscape. I'm going to research it. And I found that there was an active serial killer there in the little town where I was born, when I was born. And I thought about how strange that was. It's just like a sort of background pressure. So yeah, but I scare easily, Ivy. I don't think I'm destined to be a crime writer.
I think Stephen King writes with like a radio, like he's bought his own radio station so he doesn't scare himself. So
really, yeah. It's actually reassuring.
Like rock music. Yeah, he owns a radio station to keep himself, jolly. That's interesting that there was a serial killer in a small town. It must have been odd not to catch that person. Now I have a million questions about that.
Yeah. I did too. And then I made a really off-color joke when somebody was talking about it in a reading in North Carolina where my parents were attending. And I said, no one ever figured it out. It was my mom. And, but it was not. It was
not your mom. No, that would be unusual.
No.
It's funny though, there's a moment in that story, which is exactly the thing that I was obsessed with in my last book. And I continue to be obsessed with. I find serial killers incredibly boring, but I'm interested in the people around serial killers. And your character, in the main character in that story, no, is that the mom? Sorry.
Darcy.
Darcy, Dee is her mother. Well, both of them, Darcy and Dee, both at some point wonder if their estranged son / brother is the serial killer. And I'm always fascinated by the leap of like, what would it take to actually think that someone you love is a serial killer? And how do you move on from that point, even if that person isn't? And you put it right there. It's like the question that I've become the most interested in crime in the world.
Yeah. Just that these people are part of were part of a family system in some way. Also, the quality of the drawings, like crime drawings in the 70s, I felt like leaves a lot of room for interpretation and possibility.
Yeah, no, for sure. But like, imagine thinking that someone you were related to or knew could have done something like that, and then thinking, oh, I guess he didn't. Like, that's, for me, that's an unrecoverable moment. Like, that just
Completely
that's it.
agree.
That's it.
There's no going too far back from that. Yeah.
We can open this up to questions for a minute to see, or if anyone has a question, they should put it in the chat, which I can't see for some reason.
Yeah,
Oh, there.
I think, questions sound great if there's.
And if they're not questions, we can just keep going. Oh, no.
Yeah, and we've been going for a while, so.
Oh, yeah.
Ivy, do you want to talk about your next book that's coming out in a year?
My next book, I can talk very briefly about it. It's really violent. It's inspired by Dennis Johnson's Angels, which is like really, really sad. No, it's a book. I'll just talk very briefly about it. It's about, I was just sort of interested about why we fetishize violent men, but never allow ourselves to talk about violent women. And it's a book that sort of wonders it doesn't wonder, but it just has women in it who act as violent as men do, and to see whether or not people are it's like a thought experiment, whether that's gonna be problematic. We excuse women who are violent because of, it's fine for a woman to be violent if she's been sexually abused or had, was in retaliation or some phony vigilante nonsense, but like, they just can't be violent because it's in their nature. So
I'm fascinated by that. I'm looking forward. And do you have a title yet, or still TBD?
I think it's going to be called We Die Like Men, but I'm not sure. Yeah, it's a song they sing in there. Does anyone have a question? I can't see.
I don't think they do. I think people must feel really deeply satisfied by what we've said.
Oh, Megan, do you ever want to write a novel?
I do, and I think that I will. My next book that's under contract right now is a music book. It's a nonfiction book, a biography of the first racially integrated all-girls swing band, the International Sweethearts of Rhythm, that traveled the Jim Crow South. So that's a big biography that I'm working on that requires a ton of research, and I love research, and I have to just not get lost in the research. I have to remember to write. But
did you write an article for the New Yorker about them? Okay, yeah.
I did. I've been writing about them for 12 years, weirdly. The Oxford American assigned me a piece on them forever ago. I fell completely in love, became like an accidental repository for data and artifacts and information, got to be friends with one of the last living members who was in her 90s, and she died during the pandemic. And I never really thought that I would write a book, but then at some point, kind of 12 years in, I thought I'm holding too much. I can't not write this book. So
that's great. That must be a really interesting departure to write a full-length work of nonfiction.
It is. Because through my journalism, I've just realized I love nonfiction. I think I will always compulsively write fiction and honor that, that urge. But to get back to the question, I am working on a novel right now, just because, as I mentioned earlier in the call, I'm an agent of chaos. I struggle with project fidelity. Ivy, you seem like are you clear-headed about it?
I am one project at a, I mean, I'll have other side projects like, ghostwriting or collaborating with somebody. But no, I write a book at a time. I don't have a lot of, I know this is going to sound dumb, but I don't have a lot of ideas at once. And my brain just is very narrow focused on one thing. I'm going to try to change that because I don't think it's healthy.
Really? I don't know. I think you've put out a lot of high quality work. in a short amount of time.
Really unhealthy though. There's a question here, and I have to admit that my computer is not letting me scroll down to read the end of it.
Okay.
And it's the one story we didn't really talk about at all.
I can read that for you.
Oh,
It
yeah.
says, hi, Megan. Would love to hear you speak about the origins of the Nighthag and the particular impact of that story coming last in the collection.
Yeah, I've got a sort of twist on a fairy tale character, the Nighthag, but who appears in lots of different cultures as this sort of half woman, half beast who disturbs the sleep mainly of men at night. And I thought, okay, well, you know, in my quest to be psychologically astute, why is she the way she is? You know, why did she have these urges to take the breath away from men while they sleep? And could we develop some compassion? Could we walk backwards from the anger toward hurt? I think I read somewhere that anger is a secondary emotion to hurt. So yeah, just sort of tying it all up in a sort of savage, gritty fairy tale, which I surprised myself by writing, but it is one of my favorite pieces in the book. And I read it out loud once and cried, which I felt was really lame, and I was embarrassed by that, but felt like laughing at a joke, my own joke.
I also love that the Nighthag is a story that Helena tells Skip in the previous story in Indigo Run. So it's a nice like continuation.
Yeah.
Ivy, I don't know whether you can see the question below that.
Yes, I can see that one. It says,
okay.
Tell us a little about the cow and Peaches. Oh.
Yeah, I love that question too. So the cow and Peaches actually came from an experience I had while on a run. So I'm a rural runner in Vermont, and I was on, I think, a 6-mile run and came across a cow that seemed to be not breathing in a field. And I tried to, in my earnest way, go up to the house and knock on the door and let these people know they had, you know, a suffering cow. And there were cars home and no one would answer. And I kept knocking on the door, and it was just a very eerie, disquieting feeling. So that, you know, this idea of the sort of like ladies' Christian boarding house and the suffering cow and things sort of just getting away from people with somewhat good intentions was kind of based in reality, had a foothold in a sort of local landscape for me.
That's it's funny. It reminded me of a teacher actually from Bennington, Doug Bauer. He said he went on a vacation to a very nice Airbnb at the first days of Airbnb in the California coast, and they drove him. There was a dying horse like outside the farmland, and then it was over like the holiday weekend, and the horse, you know, died over the next day, and no one came to take it away. So they had this really lavish Airbnb like on the Sonoma coast. Horse.
That's super dark.
No one came.
Oh wow!
I was reminded of that, like, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to move a dead cow.
It is. I mean, here in Vermont, if it dies, you know, 6 months of the year, the ground's frozen. So if any large animal dies, you have to actually wait and get a backhoe. And, you know, there's all sorts of, it's interesting, our human capacity to see suffering and decide if it bothers us or not, or what we can digest or metabolize, and how selective we are about that, I think.
Yeah, it is interesting, and sort of how certain people can compartmentalize certain types of suffering and then get absolutely overwrought about others.
Yeah, I sort of am always overwrought about everything.
Overwrought, yeah.
Yeah, I feel it all.
Yeah, especially with animals, it's really hard. And I also think that like some of my animal empathy, compassion, suffering is directly related to other people's lack of it. You know, like I get more emotionally bent out of shape when I see somebody else. It's not always specific to exactly what's going on. It's sort of a reaction to other people's, you know, inattention.
That's so interesting. The vacuum, like a space to blow into there. Well, I don't want to overextend, you know, here, but it's been an awesome conversation. Ivy, thank you for taking the time to read the stories in your busy life and transition and everything you have.
No, it's such a pleasure. This will be my last event in this office, so like I feel like I'm going out with a bag with the right book for the right, you know, moment. So I'm super. It was such a pleasure, Megan. These stories were awesome and beautiful and really moving and very important to me. So thanks.
Well, thank you, Ivy. And yeah, coffee and drinks on me next week.
Absolutely. Oh, not a doubt. Well, just definitely compliments on you for sure.
Yeah, and Helen, thank you and to Oblong for hosting us. It was nice of you to make space for the conversation.
It's our pleasure, and you guys are going to have great fun in California. So thank you both for joining us this evening. I know taking time out of your busy lives. A reminder that copies of House Strangers season are available at Oblong Books and oblongbooks.com. Before we close, I would like to extend our thanks to Mia O'Neill and Simon & Schuster for helping make this event happen. And thank you to everyone who joined us this evening and spent part of their evening with us. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye.